thought that you were here with Lalo.
No,
I get an email from you about the question.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, just I think we can rearrange the order there and just ask which question first there. How are your questionnaires coming?
I already have like a draft about this questionnaire.
Okay.
Right here.
Now, whenever you finalize the questionnaire, make sure you create a heading at the top where you include any information about the participants, depending on what you need. If you want to include the name, if you're interested in any attributes of the teacher, their age, whatever information you want to know about that person, I would include there in the heading, and also then include an introduction where you introduce yourself and talk very briefly about the study, that you're a student here at the university, that you are applying, doing research on this topic, and then I would conclude with a sentence that asks them to complete the following questions. Please complete the following questions to the best of your ability, and then you would segue right into the questions. Okay. Now, now you have questions here about do you know of any type of error corrections, and which ones, when do corrections take place, which errors do students comment, how do you decide which errors to correct? Okay. I think you can include one question that includes these first 4 questions about, and ask how. How do you correct your students when they, let's see, how do you correct your students when they make a mistake? When they make a grammatical mistake when speaking? A general question, and because then that hopefully they'll talk about. Let's see, how do you do it? Or you could even ask, provide an example, a typical example of how you correct your students' grammatical mistakes or errors when speaking, so that they then kind of explain a situation where they correct. And hopefully the idea is that they will include a lot of this information that you're asking as separate questions. When do corrections take place? Because a lot of these questions you're actually going to look into more deeply when you choose your participants. So the questions need to be enough for you to kind of know a little bit about how they approach error correction so that you can make a decision, but you don't necessarily need a lot of detailed information, because remember, you're going to be submitting this to several teachers with the idea that you would then, based on the results of the questionnaire, choose the teachers for your study.
Okay.
So, an error useful. So I think a lot of the questions that you have here, you can kind of hold off and save some of these questions later when you have your interview. Maybe you can use some of these questions as a guide in your interview guide. You might ask questions about the 4 skills. Let's see. You're asking which skill, which is the most important skill in your class. Okay, you might ask that. You're looking to see if speaking is one of their favorites. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And which is the easiest skill to correct? Okay, so I like the question that you have for independent skill. Which is the most important skill in your class? I think you can use the next 2 questions. Which is the easiest skill to correct? Which is the hardest skill to correct? And I would avoid, I would hold off on is it good or bad to base your class on grammar. But you do have a question, are grammar errors frequent in your students? I would rephrase that and ask, how frequent are grammar errors typically in your classroom? But that's another good question that I would ask. In which of the following skills are more frequent, the grammar errors? Okay. All right. You can include that one also. Trying to. Okay. So you have, in which of the following skills are more frequent, the grammar errors? Order them. Okay. One, the most frequent for. Okay. So I would include that question. Okay. So I would include those questions, and I would end with the first question that you have. So how do you approach correcting grammar errors when your students are speaking in class?
Okay.
And end with that question.
So the first question
at the end.
Change it to the end.
Yeah, because you don't want to lead them, because you're asking later which is the important skill. But if you ask them questions about speaking, then they may say, well, should I answer? Maybe I should answer speaking.
Okay.
So I would just ask them first, what is the most important skill, and then go into specifically talk about speaking at the end. Yeah, and then I think, or you don't mention speaking at all. You just talk about grammar correction, error correction.
So maybe just asking them to come up with that information without leading.
How do you correct errors?
Okay.
And just not even mention speaking, and just see how they respond. If they talk more about writing, because I think it's likely that they're all going to be talking about speaking anyway. But you can get your you'll have an idea about their how they feel about which skill is most important if they have a preference by asking the questions that you have here. So I think the rest of the questions, like whole group, let's see. Are you focusing on?
The questions about the whole group and the individual and small groups I included because you told me that I may be going to focus on only one of them.
Right, okay. Okay, so I would leave that in here. Order the following options. The most frequent, correct. Right, check your grammar here. Order the following options according to the most frequent ways to correct the classroom. So you're asking, do they correct more as a whole group or more as a small group or individually?
Yes, in which of those three their correction take place more frequently.
Okay, so just check the grammar here. Because it's the way you have it, it's really not a question. It doesn't have to be a question. You're saying order. I would rearrange the grammar here and say, of the four options, which are the most frequent in terms of how you correct grammar errors in your classes? Okay. Yeah. Okay, then you have questions about how their students feel about error correction. I don't think I would include that for right now. I would save those questions later. They may be useful for your interview guide. Okay. And that'll be something you're going to be researching when you observe to see how and talk to them about how they feel about error correction. And you can talk to the teachers later about that. Let's see. Have you noticed? Have you ever noticed? I'll tell you what. Go ahead and leave one question about. You have a question here about how do your students feel about being corrected in the class, and just leave it like that. If they say, well, I've never asked, or if they just, if they know, they're going to state it. If they don't, they won't know. So maybe just one question at the end about how do your students feel about being corrective, about you correcting their grammar errors, and just see what kind of response you get. Okay? And then the rest of those at the end, I would save those for perhaps your interview guide. Okay? So I think that'll do it there. And I would end your questionnaire by asking the teacher if they're willing to participate in the study. If they're willing to have 2 or 3 interviews, that they will give you permission to observe their class, maybe interview their students.
So even if this is the pilot one, the one I'm going to pilot.
Well, yeah, I would include it myself. Just yeah, even though it is a pilot, that they hopefully will answer, because you just again are just looking to see how they answer. So I would include it. Piloting, I don't know how many we talked about piloting, but I don't think you need much more than 2. I mean, don't spend a lot of time in the pilot. Just 1 or 2 to fill it out and give feedback to you. You may even ask them when they finish, do you have any comments about the questionnaire other than how you answered it? So they may say, oh, well, this question number 3, I'm not sure about. Yeah, so. And how many participants are you planning on applying this to?
Like after the pilot?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the ones you told me, like 15, 20 teachers.
Okay, and where are you focusing your research on?
Extension courses.
Okay.
So I'm going to apply Infomento.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. So I would try to make these changes and apply the pilot as soon as you can, preferably this week. And if at any point you want to discuss the pilot or their responses, or even if you apply this week to the 15 or 20 teachers that you're focusing on in extension, you want to talk about it before next tutoring session, that's fine. Otherwise, we can discuss it during our next tutoring session. But try to make a little progress as much, each week, so that hopefully you can get everything together before, and you can start, a little bit earlier in the data collection. That would be, I think better, just to give you another week at least in the data collection process, just in case you need it. If you don't need it, great. But it's better to have a little bit more time than this. Yeah. And also take a look at your literature review. Make sure if you have any questions about your literature review, we can talk about those now, or you can send me emails in Canvas if you want me to clarify something, if something's not clear about the feedback that I'm providing. Do you have any questions you want to talk about today about the literature review, or?
No, but the literature review, no, because I was trying to focus on the instrument. Okay. So I just saw the comments, and most of them I saw it was about the claim and it is one comment, like the meal plan. Right. In the video that you post, it was like 4 to 12 sentences. I saw the girl writing 4 to 12 sentences. For
our purposes, anywhere from, I would say, 5 to 8, typically. 5 to 8 sentences are an approximate sentence count, but it's also going to depend on the type of sentence. If they're really short sentences, they're all simple sentences, and they're not very descriptive, then, But as a general rule, somewhere between 5 to 8. Anything over 8, just be careful with. But typically, that's what I recommend for paragraph.
No matter like the lines on the paragraph, just like to have good sentences, or
it's not so many lines. I'm not really counting lines.
It is more about the
more about the sentences.
Okay.
But I'm looking at the whole discourse of the paragraph. So again, if you have 8 choppy, simple sentences, pues tampoco, right? Mm-hmm. So but as a general rule, 8 sentences, because if you consider each of the each sentence in your paragraph should be one of 4 types. It should be either main idea, which will always come first.
Yes.
Your sentence should be an evidence sentence, or it could be an analysis sentence, or a linking sentence. So you're going to have at least 4 sentences to have those 4 types. And I'm saying a minimum of 5 because typically you're going to have either 2 sentences that are evidence, or you probably will have 2 sentences that are analyze. So, for example, you might have 1 sentence that is evidence and 2 sentences that describe it, or vice versa, 2 sentences that are evidence, 1 sentence that analyzes those 2. So the minimum you'll probably have will be 5 sentences. Now, you could have 2 evidence and 2 analyze. You could have 2 analyze and 3. 2 evidence and 3 analyze. You could have 3. I mean, there's a lot of different combinations. It just depends on what how you're forming your argument and how much evidence that you need. But try to have, when you have your evidence, 2 different. If you have 2 sentences that are 2 different sources, you're going to have. I would prefer that you have 2 different sources, not 2 different evidences from the same source. Or 3 that.
Okay. There is something about it was 7 references about only 1 source, but it was like Lowen, the author Lowen. I found it in 2 different articles, but in one of the articles it was Lowen and 7 more authors.
Okay. So, well, if it's different, okay, I didn't check. Maybe I assumed it was the same resource. If it's a different resource, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's the same author but a different resource, that's okay. Just double check.
Yes, I'm going to check.
Yeah, double check it, but and make sure that you have it twice in your references.
Yes, I have both references.
Okay, so that's okay if that's the case. But anytime you start getting up to like 7 or 8 or 9 citations from the same resource, that you're getting kind of too many citations from one source.
Which will be the maximum of citations from one?
Well,
in order to not be like too.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, anywhere when it gets up to about 6 or 7, that tends to be a lot. Looking at the whole document.
Okay.
Now, if I look at one paragraph and I see 3 citations from the same source, then that also, I would say, that's too many citations from one source. So it's at the paragraph level sometimes, maybe not in your case, but sometimes it could be, or it could be from an entire document. If you don't have, and it's usually, the problem is both, usually. I mean, when I see that someone is having too many citations from the same source for the entire document, they also have examples where an individual paragraph will have too many citations from the same source. So you want to kind of look at both and make sure that you are trying to compare and contrast as much as possible different perspectives, different resources as much as possible. So double check that. If you have 7 from one source, but you're each paragraph you're combining them quite a bit and comparing different resources, then maybe that's okay. But I saw some that were up until I saw 10 citations in some, and then that gets to be a little bit too much. So just double check that. Obviously, double check that you have references for each citation, and vice versa, citation for each reference.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? APA, do you have any questions about APA formatting or?
Well, no, what causes me more troubles is like the reference list, because I tend to do it on Word and then to copy and paste it. Many times the format changes.
Okay.
But, well, that is, I know how to do it. I just know to find a way to not change the format.
I would try to get those changes done. I know you're working now on your data collection, but try to get those changes done while the lit review is still fresh in your mind.
Yes.
Because it'll get harder the longer you wait. So, but yeah, if you have any other questions, just let me know about your literature review.
Yes. I'm going to try to work in both. this week
Okay.
in order to make the changes.
All right. Any other instruments that you want to discuss, or you want me to look
Only
at?
the question for today.
Okay.
Yes.
Bueno. All right. Well, I don't have anything else. We can go ahead and keep making progress. And if I don't see you this week, we'll sit down next week, next Monday, and we'll look at bringing the results that you have for next week. And again, if you want me to look at something this week before your tutoring session, that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Javier.